Bienvenido a La Trinchera, yo soy Christian Sobrino y en este episodio nos acompaña en su tour triunfal de libro, ahora mi amigo, antes colega, en otros momentos contrincante, David Skeel. Hello, sir.
Hello, sir.
How are you doing?
I am doing well. It's great to be with you in person.
Yeah, it's been 2 years, right?
It has.
A lot of stuff has happened personally. Not that much has happened publicly.
The stories do look the same. You
Yeah.
can just change the dates on the top of the newspaper, and it can be pretty much the same stories.
Both here in the U.S.
That's true. That's true.
The whole situation, like in the Middle East, we seem to be caught like in a loop, I feel, and everybody's like waiting for like a big event to happen to solve everything, and the event never gets here.
I think that's right. Yeah, the particular crisis changes, but it tends to be one that looks like one we've had before, and we got the same players,
Similar characters,
same
yeah.
president. It's a funny time.
So what are you doing on island?
I am down here to talk about my book, to talk about Promised Land. It's been 2 years since I was on the oversight board. I was on the oversight board for almost 8 years. That ended in summer 2024. I was hoping PREPA would be restructured and we would be more or less done by then, and we almost made it. We had a 2-week confirmation hearing, and I think Judge Swain would have confirmed it, but unfortunately the Federal Court of Appeals got in the way and reversed her and sent everybody back to the drawing board. And as it's turned out, I haven't been back since then. I keep thinking I'm going to come down and hang out and, as a normal person, not one of those bad guys on the oversight board.
Oh, and no security?
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever been here with no security, and it is freeing, although it's a little more complicated when you don't have a ride everywhere. With the security, I used to have somebody pick me up at the plane when I got off the plane, and wherever I wanted to go, I had a ride, but it's really great to be back. I love coming down, and it's been wonderful. So just doing a lot of talking about the book this time, and next time I come down, I'll do more truly fun stuff and get out a little bit more. But it feels like it's been a 10-year process, and the timing of the book works really well with that. 10 years of ProMesa, a bunch of anniversaries right now. And seemed like a good time to come down. Before
we go into the book, it's 10 years from the law getting approved and the first board getting appointed, and I've done a couple of interviews also. Like did one for nuevo. I think you were interviewed for that documentary as well, and we'll say it other media. And I think the interesting question for someone like you, one of the original board members, is, do you think when you were appointed, did you imagine that there would still be a board 10 years later?
Absolutely not. I knew it was going to take a little while, but if you had asked me in 2016, how long is the board going to be there, I probably would have said 4 years, maybe 5. We had 3-year terms, and so we were really thinking in terms of 3 years. We were committed to trying to get the Commonwealth debt restructuring in 3 years. And I think I would have thought, that'll take 3 years. There'll be a new board will come in. They'll be there for a year or so, and then it'll all be done, because that's usually the way it works with oversight boards. But this has been lots more complicated. We were not planning for Hurricane Maria. We were not planning for a pandemic, earthquakes. It really has been a wild ride.
And I think also I remember the first requirements for the fiscal plan and the whole once and done. It's like, buddy, this Puerto Rico, there's no once and done ever.
Well, in our defense, the once and done was really the restructuring. That's what we were talking about. But that was our mantra. We said that over and over and over. And when you look back at that fiscal plan, which you were not part of,
it's
not your problem. It's kind of laughable how kind of simple it is, and it looks very different from the current fiscal plans. But it was quite remarkable that we got there.
Yeah. I thought it wasn't my problem. It became my problem later. And when I looked closely at it the first time, when I was getting dragged into the implementation stuff, I was like, oh my God, they certified this?
Well,
but I think there was just a lot of information that wasn't.
No, we spent the first 6 months just trying to figure out in ballpark terms what are the revenues and expenses. I mean, nobody knew. Nobody knew how big the structural budget deficit was.
Yeah.
Nobody knew anything, and we were all kind of working in the dark with very small flashlights.
Yeah.
I mean, it was sort of amazing in a way. I mean, we came together with Governor Rosselló and the team at the last minute, and that was part of why it was. I think the fiscal plan was it was a bunch of PowerPoint slides basically. In the end. It was quite dramatic.
So, okay, now let's go into the book. Promised Land, the inside story of the Puerto Rico Debt Crisis, David Skeel. Thank you for the advance copy.
You are quite welcome.
What's the book about? Do the blurb, and then we'll go into more.
Well, I'll come at it a couple of different ways. It's about the crisis, and the restructuring of the Commonwealth debt is what's at the heart of it. But it really is several different kinds of books in one, in my view. One is it is the story of one of the great bankruptcy battles and debt crisis dramas in American history in the last century. So when you think about big dramatic bankruptcies, Enron collapsing in 2001, 2002 period, Caesar's Palace bankruptcy a few years ago, which was a very prominent bankruptcy in the bankruptcy world. This is bigger than both of them. You know, this is $120 billion if you add the financial debt to the unfunded pensions. So one part of it is it's a story about a bankruptcy battle and 5 years of trying to get to a restructuring of the Commonwealth's debt and a fixing of the pension system. From another perspective, it's about the effort to give Puerto Rico a fresh start, to take this crisis and make something positive out of it, and to provide a path forward, which I think the Commonwealth restructuring does as well. And then finally, what the book is about is it's a case study for how governments become dysfunctional and what your options are when they do, when they get into deep crises that can't be solved with ordinary tools. And the kinds of things that Congress thought about and implemented with Puerto Rico, in particular an oversight board in bankruptcy, those are the same options we have if Chicago defaults on its debt, if Illinois defaults on its debt. In a sense, even if the United States defaults on its debt, which I suppose is the least likely of those, but a debt crisis for the United States is no longer unthinkable.
And it's spoken about publicly, which reminds me a lot of before Garcia Padilla said, you know, the debt is unpayable. And you mentioned in the book how he was dragging it out even in the interview because it was taboo to say something like that, right? And absolutely. I thought with the every so often I hear this talk on public outlets about the U.S. debt, and it used to be something like only wackos would talk about, right? In magazines that sell gold bars to old people, and National Review. But now it's like even lefty media, everybody's talking about the debt issue, and I think that's the first inkling of or that something's brewing that can.
I think that's true. I mean, when you look at the percentage of our budget, the debt is the interest on the debt. It's scary, and everybody knows that if somehow the dollar were to cease being the reserve currency, our debt would be a real crisis. Yeah. I mean, the interest rates we'd have to pay on the debt would go way up. it's no longer unthinkable. It's still obviously unlikely that we'll have a debt crisis, but it's no longer unthinkable.
I like the description you gave of the book, because my impression, I was surprised when I read the book that you were able to pull off a single narrative of something that was very complicated from a legal standpoint, from a financial standpoint, from a public administration standpoint, the whole history of how Promesa became law and all that. It's a difficult book to write. I think that the way that I would describe it is, it's not the inside story, it's a inside story.
Says an insider.
Says an insider.
who could tell another story.
Exactly. No, I think that's becoming, and it's something that I found very illuminating, because while I was reading, and I come up in the book a couple of times, I would say, I remember this completely differently.
I knew you were going to say that. You of all people.
Yeah, I remember this differently, but I can see why. I see your perspective, at least. Like, I understand it. Was it a difficult task?
Writing the book was one of the...
I mean, more than just writing a book. Writing a book is a difficult task, but like what?
Writing a book with a coherent story that people can see as a beginning, a middle, and an end was really, really hard. This was one of the most difficult, probably the most difficult writing I've ever done in my life. I spent 5 years with this as the major thing I was writing. In a sense, I started working on the book the moment I got appointed to the board. I was pretty sure I was going to write a book in the end. But I've been seriously writing it for the last 5 years or so, and it's very, very difficult to come up with a narrative. And there are parts of the book that didn't end up fitting the narrative, that I was... part of me is sad that I had to cut them out, but I had a chapter about the Doral Bank and the banking crisis in Puerto Rico in the in the 10s. Which I quite liked, but it just didn't fit the overall narrative. I had a chapter of all the ideas people had for solving the Puerto Rico debt crisis before Promesa in 2012, 2013, 2014. Some of that got into the book. But I had another chapter about a variety of different plans, which I think historically is very interesting, but it just wasn't part of the narrative. And narrative finally came together a year or so ago, and I finally knew what the book looked like, how it was gonna end. So it was an ordeal writing it, but it's a wonderful feeling when you feel like you've told your story. I mean, people may like it, they might not like it. But I think anybody who reads this book is going to learn something from it, no matter how involved you've been in the crisis. There will be things in here that are new to you.
Yeah. How did you address or think about the issue of talking about Puerto Rico, but not being from Puerto Rico?
That's a very sensitive issue, as you know. It's very... it was one of the things I thought about throughout the whole book. You know, I can say things about the status issue, I can say things about the history, but I'm not Puerto Rican. And there is, at some level, there are dimensions of that are not my story to tell, in my view. So there's really was a balancing. You have to talk about that to talk about Puerto Rico, and you have to know something about that to have any vantage into the the politics are so complicated. But I'm not Puerto Rican, and so I made a decision relatively early on that I wasn't going to pretend I was a Puerto Rican. I was going to be who I am. I'm a law professor. I was brought in as a technocrat, in a sense, for the oversight board. I'm coming in as an outsider. I'm coming in as an outsider who cares about what's going on, who's done his best to educate himself. You know, I've read an enormous amount about Puerto Rico, but at the same time, I'm not Puerto Rican. And
did the publisher? I don't know if you can talk about what your discussions with the publisher or editor are, but did the publisher push back on the issue? Like
they really didn't. I mean, it was. I guess I would say the publisher trusted me, and they didn't push back on anything except the length of the book. It was a little bit longer than it is now, and they wanted it to be initially to be shorter.
We need a director's cut.
Or something. Fortunately, they kind of gave way on. I mean, they originally imagined, I think it was going to be a 200-page book.
Yeah.
You can't tell this story in 200 pages, and. So I forewarned them. I told them the book was going to come in a lot bigger than they anticipated, but they still were a little taken aback.
I think you pulled it off because you treated matter-of-factly. For example, when you quote, I forgot her name. She worked with Jim Milstein. She's really wicked smart.
Yeah, Abram.
And you quote her. I'm paraphrasing, but she's essentially saying, David, you need to understand their politics can get really psycho on this issue.
I love that. And her particular quote is, you start out building a pipeline from the east to the west, and you get a new administration that realizes there needs to be a pipeline.
So they'll just oppose it.
From north to south. It's a good quote, I think. And she's an outsider too.
Yeah.
She's very smart.
And when you discuss the issue on the shadow the shadow congressman, and you're very frank in saying that you guys just thought it was silly. The whole exercise was silly, but you say, I mean, the question isn't silly.
Not at all. Oh, no.
I think that was, I read it fair. I thought it was fair. I think people might get hung up on the Nixon quote because he's I think the one that says silly or something like that. But I think it was a fair description of what the discussion would look like when you present it to somebody from outside.
I think that's right. But we were aware of how explosive the issue is.
Yeah.
And I talk about that in the book. That was the one time where we just couldn't avoid the status issue, where some people wanted the shadow elections to be funded, some people didn't want them to be funded, and our usual stance was, if you can find the money, we don't make policy decisions, we'll fund it. But that one turned into a mess.
Yeah.
And fortunately, it seemed to work out okay. In the end, the elections were had, and they went forward, and there weren't riots or
the Archbishop calling you on the matter
he's a friend. I'm a big fan of the Archbishop, and he was worried. I mean, he thought that that there could be issues. And anytime status comes up, there can be issues.
What's your not your preference? I mean, what would be your, if somebody asked you like, hey David, like, what's this question they have down there about? You were there 8 years. You handled it. Like, is it real? What would be your description of it to somebody from the outside?
The first thing I would do would be to talk about the options and talk about the parties and how the political parties, how the options map onto the political parties. But what I end up saying is I genuinely don't have a strong position on status. I mean, I felt like
that's the most gringo answer ever.
I know. Well, if you aren't forced to have a position, you don't want to have a position. You're from here, you're forced to have a position. But I mean, in truth, I think there are deep difficulties in the current American environment with each of the status options. They're just, if there were a silver bullet, this is the right status solution, we would get there. But they're deep problems with of different kinds with the difference. Yeah. The current status is undemocratic. Statehood is tough to get to because of the way the politics work in in Washington, independence would be really complicated. Nobody can imagine independence without the U.S. contributing a lot of money, and so you've got to deal with the question: how much money for how long? So it's so complicated.
And you add to that it's a big enough issue to matter to us, but it's not big enough for the U.S. federal government to make it to have it like on the radar
as an issue. Yeah, I mean, they care about it because the two parties have different stakes from their mainland self-interest perspective. But as a matter of, what do we do with this awkward status we've had for over 120 years, almost 130 years now, it doesn't make it onto the radar screen often or seriously.
And you described the territorial issue with, what was it, like a hangover? So you use a phrase saying that Puerto Rico is like this remnant of this age.
Well, it's a legacy of American imperialism. I mean, it is, in my view. I mean, there are a lot of issues that it plays into, some that help Puerto Rico, some that don't help. Puerto Rico. I mean, having triple tax exemption for your bonds is a great thing if you use them well. It's a terrible thing if you borrow too much.
Let's take a commercial break and we'll be right back.
Este episodio de La Trinchera es presentado por La Tigre. Sabemos que los códigos de vestimenta en los espacios profesionales se han puesto algo casual, pero no podemos olvidar que una imagen bien curada puede aportar a nuestro progreso profesional. Detrás de La Tigre se encuentra un selecto grupo de expertos en moda y estilo personal que te ayudarán a elaborar una imagen que cuente tu historia de éxito. Con opciones de ropa a la medida y al detalle de origen italiano para él y colecciones de Europa para ella, La Tigre es moda para una nueva generación que aprecia el valor que una imagen de progreso puede aportar a nuestras vidas. En mi caso, para mí siempre ha sido importante portar piezas a la medida de La Tigre, dadas mis comparecencias públicas y en los medios. Y ustedes que me han visto en los periódicos o en televisión saben muy bien que mis chaquetas, mis camisas, mis pantalones y mis corbatas de La Tigre me hacen lucir muy monarca. Visiten la boutique de La Tigre ubicada en Ciudadela en Santurce o síganlos en Instagram en Shop La Tigre. La Tigre es un estilo en función de progreso y auspiciador de este programa.
Y de regreso. Okay, so David, we left off before the break on the issue of the status, and I wanted to bring up a story you give in the book of when Rafael Hernández, and I think it's very illustrative of how, of the conflict of what works for Washington versus what might work for Puerto Rico or for a state jurisdiction, right? For a smaller jurisdiction. And you give the story of how Rafael Hernández Colón, the ex-governor, and I think one of our political titans, right?
For sure.
Men would cry if they saw him, like it was at that level, right? And the fight between him and this other titan, Romero Barceló, essentially defined politics for like 20 some years on island. So this is like a man of weight.
Right.
And you give the story of him meeting with Antonio Weiss, who was an assistant. Well, I don't know if he ever got confirmed, but he had a position of high importance in the Treasury Department, and he was the point man for Puerto Rico's fiscal crisis, right?
There was a difficulty with his confirmation. Progressives oppose, even though he is a progressive himself. He came from Wall Street, and so there was big pushback. He was not confirmed, but he was brought into Treasury as counselor. He was a counselor to the Treasury.
A counselor, that's the term.
Yeah, so he was very much like I don't know the Washington terminology, but whatever right below the secretary is, and he was the point man on Puerto Rico.
So this Puerto Rican titan who governed the island for 12 years was Secretary of Justice when he was like 12 years old, was the president of the Senate. He's talking to Weiss, and he says, and I'm quoting here, Hernández Colón told Weiss with Aníbal Acevedo Vilá, another former pro-Commonwealth Party governor, at his side, Promesa would destroy everything he had spent his political career building up. The former governor's voice was cracking, and he started to cry. But then you end the chapter with this quote. When legislative experts like Yuval Levine, who I love,
I do too,
author of the influential book American Covenant, great book, mourned the decline of congressional lawmaking and the rise of performative politics in this country, Promesa is a rare and vital illustration of what the fully functional political process they long for would look like. When I read that, I threw the book.
You should never throw my book. It's a good thing it was just a printout of.
It's an advanced copy.
Yeah,
you can throw it around.
It's not the hard copy.
I was marking it up, as you can see.
Please treat the hard copy with respect.
No, I mean it affected me, and Hernández Colón is not from my party, right? My party was defined by fighting him,
right?
But he is a titan of our history. He is brought to tears over this law that's crushing what he dedicated his life to. But then somebody like Yuval Levine can say this is a great success.
Well, I should qualify that by saying I said it was a success.
No, I mean,
Yuval didn't say.
Yeah, you're right.
I hope he would agree with me, but the words were my words. So let me say a couple of things about that. One is, obviously, the reason that Hernández Colón was concerned was that Promesa, particularly the oversight board part of Promesa, seemed inconsistent with the idea of a commonwealth as of 1952 being more than an ordinary territory and the sovereignty that went along with that. So that's what he was upset about. It's probably worth saying that during this same time, there were a couple of Supreme Court cases that raised questions about the sovereignty of Puerto Rico. One, right before Promesa passed, well, both of them right before Promesa passed, that struck down the Recovery Act that had been enacted in 2014. Another case called Sanchez Valle about double jeopardy, but also raising the sovereignty kinds of concerns. So it seemed an affront to sovereignty. You know, one thing I would say about that, and I see where he's coming from. In my view, you could put an oversight board in place in a state. As long as Congress was also giving them money. I mean, it's easier to put an oversight board in place with Puerto Rico than with a state. But I believe you could put one in place with a state as well. So I don't think it was quite as bad as he thought it was, even though I completely understand. I mean, it's an affront to sovereignty. You know, it's colonialism, and that's what he was concerned about. The other thing I would say is it's important to appreciate that not everybody in the PPD party was opposed to Promesa. So the governor, Garcia Padilla, was in favor of Promesa, as was the resident commissioner, Pedro Pierluisi, who's PNP, obviously. But so it was very complicated. I mean, everybody realized it was an intrusion on Puerto Rico's sovereignty. I believe it was necessary given the depth of the crisis. But I believe Congress could also do something similar with the state. Now, that's that's a controversial position. Not everybody.
You said so in the book that not everybody believes.
Yeah, that is debated, but I think I'm right about that.
Based on why do you think it would be? I mean, the book is good for the general reader because it's not you're a law professor, but it's not a law book.
No, and this just comes up at the very end as a sentence. I'm not.
But I'm an attorney, so I want to hear the argument. Like how would Congress be able to put a board?
So the argument is it really has to do with what in constitutional law is called commandeering doctrine, that Congress can require states to do things under some circumstances, but Congress can't put a gun to a state's head is a loose interpretation of what is okay and what's not okay. The Supreme Court has made clear that if Congress isn't just telling a state, you have to do this, but Congress is offering to give them money and for the congressional representatives to use some of their limited resources to pump it into that state, Congress can do a lot more than it otherwise would. It can put strings on that money, and in my view, imposing an oversight board along with some money to help in a debt crisis would be constitutional because those strings are permissible.
So it's kind of like the Medicaid funding case?
It's exactly the Medicaid funding case.
And when Obamacare the Affordable Care Act was approved, there was a controversy regarding additional Medicaid funding and the requirements that it would bring tied to that additional funding. And the Supreme Court said, you can't obligate them to take the funding, but if they take it, they need to comply with.
That's right. The Supreme Court was not happy with the way it was originally structured, which was if you don't agree to take the original funding, you lose all of the funding. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court said that's like putting a gun to their head. But in my view, saying, Illinois is in deep crisis, can't meet its pension obligations or its debt, we'll give you $2 billion to shore up your pension system in return for an oversight board that has a veto over your budget. I think that's constitutional. It's a close call. So I would not put any of my own money on that being constitutional, but I will say it on Christian Sobrino's podcast.
But it would be tied to a bailout.
That's right. I mean, there'd have to be money. So the one difference is with Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is a territory, Congress did not have to provide money.
Yeah.
Because of the territories clause of the Constitution, they could impose the board. But I do believe you could end up with a board with a state too.
The bailout question for me has become increasingly more interesting because I think that in retrospect, a lot of decision makers outside of Puerto Rico, regardless of what local decision makers might think, if they look back at everything, they'd be like, I think it would have been just easier to bail them out. And then I was reading a Geithner's book, ex-Secretary of Treasury, and he was admonishing the EU, the European Union technocrats, for being too hostile to Greece and other countries during the Euro crisis and being too moralistic about bailing out and all that. And it's interesting because you start the book basically saying Puerto Rico had the bad luck of entering its insolvency when the U.S. had already bailed out like 5 industries and they didn't want to do any more bailouts. Do you think the bailout would have been easier?
Absolutely not.
No?
I don't. I mean, there might have been a case for including some money as part of PROMESA, but a bailout would not have solved the problem. And let me say a few things about this. One is Tim Geithner loved bailouts. That was kind of what he did. And it worked, in a sense, with the big banks. I agree that Greece was not handled well. They did get bailouts. In my view, the big problem with Greece was that they didn't recognize soon enough that the debt had to be restructured too. I mean, Europe it wasn't a problem of there was some resistance to the bailout in Greece initially, but they did they did a series of bailout loans to Greece, but initially they said, we are not going to restructure the debt. And it was only when they finally restructured the debt that they started to improve things in Greece. If there had been a bailout to Puerto Rico, I think we just would have had another crisis a little bit down the road. I mean, it wasn't as if there was some unexpected surprise that made Puerto Rico unable to pay its obligation. And if you could just give them some money to tide them through the surprise, things would get better. The problem was there were structural deficits in the budget. Nobody knew what the deficits were. It was a huge amount of debt that Puerto Rico was able to borrow in no small part because of the triple tax exemption. The market continued to buy Puerto Rico debt, even when it was clear there was a major crisis. I think a bailout would have just postponed the crisis. I think major surgery was necessary, unfortunately, and so something like PROMESA was inevitable.
Even if you had strings attached. So, for example, the DC board, that was the example for PROMESA, it had access to treasury funds, but the board was still there, right?
Right.
So there were strings attached.
That's right. And the board had a lot of power.
Way more power, notwithstanding what Martin Bienenstock thinks.
As you and your Governor Rosselló proved to us when we tried to say we had similar power to take over PREPA. So, I mean, the DC board had a lot of power. Yeah. They had control over the controller who was in the government seeing every dollar that came in. They had the power to veto legislation. So that was a bailout plus very, very big strings. And I think you could have maybe done that in Puerto Rico if you had an oversight board and you had some funding. But you were going to get a board or something like it inevitably, I think.
Do you think the board was the inevitable part of PROMESA? I mean, these are questions that keep me up at night sometimes. For example, I think Title III and Title VI were inevitable. It had, and you needed a federal court to do it. But I think the board element was optional. But I think other people would see it the other way around.
Well, politically, it wasn't optional. I mean, politically, there was no way you were going to get bankruptcy Title III by itself because the Republicans were not going to go for that. There was no way.
But the board was meant to make it harder to enter bankruptcy, but you guys were the ones that wanted to file it even more than us at the beginning.
That's right. Oh, that's
so it kind of jokes on them.
In a sense, I think a lot of things you can say about the board. The creditors were doing a lot of lobbying in Washington when PROMESA was being debated, and they really focused on the bankruptcy part of it. As you said, they tried to make it harder to file for bankruptcy. They tried to limit what you could do in bankruptcy. For some reason that's never been apparent to me, they didn't focus as much on the board. They insisted on a board. The Republicans were not going to vote for PROMESA without a board, just as Democrats were not going to vote for PROMESA without bankruptcy. But the creditors really didn't fight hard about the board powers, I think because they were afraid they wouldn't get the legislation. I mean, the one thing that I've heard was that at least some of the Republicans, not necessarily the creditors, feared that if the board had too much in the way of power, Nydia Velázquez and Pedro Pierluisi would turn against the board, and it would cripple PROMESA completely. That may or may not be the best explanation, but they really didn't fight that hard on the powers of the board, and the board's powers were limited.
Because they thought it was the important thing about the board, at least for their standpoint, was just make it harder to file.
That's what they wanted. I mean, the creditors wanted to have a rule initially that you had to have a voluntary deal before you could file, which would essentially make it impossible to file for Title III.
In the book, you said that when you filed Title III for the government and the public corporations, you guys didn't have a plan. I think you need to explain that. Because when I read it, I was like, what?
We didn't have a plan for where it was going. So the Puerto Rico bankruptcy filing, the Title III filing, was what we in the bankruptcy world call a free fall bankruptcy. That's where you don't know what you're going to do when you get in. I mean, where we were was it's getting towards early May 2017. The standstill that PROMESA had imposed a standstill where the creditors could not sue. They couldn't keep trying to collect what they were owed. The standstill is very much like the so-called automatic stay that goes into place with bankruptcy. That was about to run out. And so it wasn't possible, in my view, to have a full plan at that point. We were just figuring out what the revenues and expenses were, and we needed the automatic. We knew that the debt had to be restructured, and we needed the automatic stay to stop the creditors from suing left and right and trying to grab whatever they could. And so it was clear to us that we needed bankruptcy. It was not clear to your governor's administration initially that we needed bankruptcy, although happily he came around.
Yeah, he signed the letter.
He did. And I was of the view that we could file, that we could make a case that he had clearly signaled that the debt needed to be restructured, and that we could make a case that even without explicitly authorizing us to file, we could file. But not everybody agreed with that within the board, and we didn't want to go into bankruptcy that way. We wanted to go into bankruptcy with the governor at our side.
Do you think my impression on how you describe our fights is that we just had a supreme failure to communicate each other's priorities in a way that the other party could understand it. Because obviously there's a point where you can communicate perfectly, but you say, I just don't agree, and that's that. But there's, for example, this issue on the pensions that became, I think, the big stumbling block, no matter what, on any discussion we had. Kyle Rifkin, who worked for the board, you quote him saying, I think Ricky just wanted to be the man in power. And that's when I say that my reaction was like, no, we explained it 5,000 times. It wasn't a personal issue. It was, we thought we were right. And we ended up being right. Can you give me that at least?
No.
It got confirmed. The plan got confirmed, David.
It did. And I will admit, as I do in the book, I thought until very late in the process that we had to have at least a little cut to the pensions, given that they were getting so much higher percentage, even with the changes to the pension. They lost their cost of living increases. I thought for a long time, as you know, that we had to have at least a little bit of a cut. Y'all didn't, and I will agree with you on that, but it was never clear to me, it wasn't completely clear why you made it such a big issue, because it wasn't going to be a big cut. It was only going to be to higher level, to more generous pensions, not to the stingier pensions. And you could have paid the extra money back after the bankruptcy if you had the extra money. That may have came up later than
I wasn't there.
Yeah, that came up, I think, more when Pierluisi became governor.
Because I was under the impression if you settle a debt in court, you can't revisit it later.
Oh, you can revisit it. Yeah, you can come back and pay it. And by the time we were negotiating with the legislature to get the bill authorizing the restructuring in 2021, which is after you, a couple years after you, that was on the table explicitly, is if there's enough money, you can fill the gap after the bankruptcy. But that wasn't enough. And it seemed to me that there was a political calculation going on that you just couldn't agree to any restructuring, whether of the pensions, whether
it was, we could agree to everything except the cut to the current.
That's right. But it still is a little puzzling to me why it was such a big line in the sand. Why you would not give way on that in any way.
Because it was a very political,
I think that's
hot topic, and because it wasn't the first cut. The 2013 cut had already happened to general pensioners.
That's right, yeah.
And at least when we were still around, right? It wasn't just to people over 2,400. It was 1,200, I think.
Initially, yeah. It was
that's still very little money to cut from people. But
it
was, the vice versa. It's like, why was it a big issue? Why was it such a big issue for the board, right? And I can understand the legal argument, but that kind of gave way pretty. At least at the end, it gave way. So I feel happy that it was right. And
I don't know if you were you were right in the sense that
it could get confirmed.
It was approved, but the issue really was never. It was settled essentially. I mean, there wasn't really
because nobody
contested it in the end, and so it turned out not to be a problem. There was not. I can't remember whether Judge Swain explicitly said it was okay, but it was basically settled, and so there wasn't a real challenge to it. And the one big objector to the Commonwealth was Peter Hine. He was in a class of bonds that had approved the plan, so he couldn't even raise it. He couldn't complain about that. But the thing that made it frustrating at the time, I really did believe there had to be a little cut until it became clear nobody was going to oppose it. I'm very happy with the way things worked out, that there didn't have to be. I'm happy that your position prevailed in the end, but I was not happy that y'all torpedoed the whole plan. We had a plan in place which was a very creative plan, and it was a stretch. We didn't have a huge amount of creditors' support. But I loved the plan, and that was
the toggle plan?
It was the toggle plan, and I really wanted to push it in 2019. And our lawyers were a little skeptical of it too. But because of that pension fight and the statements you made when the teachers union had said that they were unsecured claims, and then you started pounding the table at that point.
I mean, the something that's not in the book is, so I think it's either Mikey Huarbe or Kyle is quoted as saying they were mad at that deal with the teachers because they weren't the ones that brokered it. No, Anna and Natalie said, please don't get involved in the negotiations with the unions.
Interesting.
Sure. I'll blow it up afterwards. That's exactly what I'm going to do. It was all forewarned.
Did you say you were going to blow it up?
Yeah. There's no way. I have a big issue with a plan, and this is discussed in the book, where Ana Mato Santos brings up this idea of, why are we negotiating only with bondholders? Let's negotiate with unions. That was really controversial for me. The whole idea that you would federalize a collective bargaining agreement was insane to me. I was flabbergasted that you even wanted to do it. So I was going to blow up anything. That was actually the product.
Christian.
I was going to blow it up to high water. I think I actually was able to blow up the ASME one, but I think they lied. But that was the...
Well, so my response to that, it's kind of in the book, is I see your point about federalizing, but in many bankruptcies, the unions are kind of shunned to the side.
Yeah.
And they're treated as an afterthought. And the idea that we would be taking them seriously and negotiating with them, which they were skeptical about. The first couple of times we met with them, they thought it was a Trojan horse, and that we were going to march the horse into the union office, and then something was going to come out, and bad things were going to happen. But I really liked the idea that we weren't going to treat the unions as an afterthought, and the bankruptcy code doesn't say that you're impaired.
It's only financial debt.
Yeah, you're impaired accepting class. You got to have an impaired accepting class, a class that votes yes on your plan, the 2/3 of which votes yes. Doesn't say that it has to be Wall Street bondholders. And I loved the idea that our at least first impaired accepting class might be unions instead. They were owed money. They were owed money too. So for me, that outweighs any federalism concerns.
I also told the retiree committee, I told them, you guys negotiate in good faith. I will blow it up afterwards.
You didn't tell me that. If you had told me that, I would have.
There were a lot of people that were in the know. But
I was really surprised. In 2019, when you started trying to blow up the plan, when you tried to, you and the governor, but really you were the point person, tried to blow up the deal with and did blow up the deal with the teachers. I was surprised. I did.
Really?
Yeah, I did not think that you were going to do that. I think it was unfortunate, although eventually we did get to a restructuring that I really think was win-win for everybody.
I think the problem was that, and this is something that you do bring up in the book, the role of the board as the government's representative in the court. I find that element of the law more controversial, but less discussed, because I think there's an argument that if the government itself had to be in front of the judge, not the board, it would feel a moral weight that it doesn't feel if the oversight board is the one that's being the representative. And also it required that for us to be able to play a part in the restructuring and the design of the plan, we were forced to use these leverage points.
Right. Which you used very effectively.
But I would prefer not to have had to do that. I would have just preferred to be a required party in the design of the plan.
A couple things to say about that. One is that was debated in Congress, and Democrats did want the governor to be the representative of Puerto Rico in bankruptcy. Republicans didn't. And the argument for not having the government be the representative in bankruptcy is this is the government that's got, you're not...
It's not, Hugo Chavez.
But it's not, I mean, it wasn't y'all in particular,
Yeah.
but the government is what Puerto Rico got into trouble. We need an independent decision maker. That was the logic. I actually think the logic is right, but the other thing to say is it really does complicate things. We knew all along that we really needed your support. Like if we pursued a plan that you didn't agree with and we asked Judge Swain to confirm it, she might just refuse to confirm it if you were opposed to the plan. If she had confirmed it and you continued to be opposed to the plan couldn't work. I mean, you were going to have to implement any plan that...
and the bondholders or the creditors would not be satisfied.
That's true as well.
They thought we would renege on it or something like that?
They just wanted to be certain it was going to be effectuated. That was true with the bonds as well. Like we probably didn't need the legislature to pass legislation approving the new bonds that would be issued in connection with the plan, but the creditors just didn't trust that. They wanted everybody to have signed off so that nobody could come in later and say, wait a second, this isn't legitimate.
Okay. Let's take a second commercial break and we'll be right back.
Señores, este año empieza donde el lujo se siente diferente. Empieza en San Juan Lincoln en la Avenida Kennedy. Allí descubrirán la presencia imponente de la Navigator, la elegancia dinámica de la Aviator, la sofisticación refinada de la Corsair y el diseño moderno de la Nautilus. Dar el paso al lujo exquisito que ofrece San Juan Lincoln es más fácil ahora. Puedes adquirir tu Lincoln con un porcentaje de interés de 2.99% APR. Visita San Juan Lincoln en la Avenida Kennedy en San Juan y explora lo que una SUV de lujo debe ser. Su equipo está listo para ofrecerles una experiencia inigualable. Para más información u orientación, llamen al 787-331-5023. 787-331-5023. San Juan Lincoln es auspiciador de este programa.
Ok, estamos de regreso. David, going back and forth on we were discussing about how the leverage points that the local government had when it came to the plan of adjustment, et cetera. There was something that there's a discussion that I've had with you before when I reviewed an article you wrote last year, I think. And I saw it again in the book. When I say you, I mean the board, all you guys and your advisors and all that, you thought the dynamic with the government was going to be more akin to Marlon Barry or what's it?
Marion Barry. Yeah.
Marion Barry. He was the mayor of D.C. when he was on the board, when he got a control board appointed. A very colorful figure.
Mm-hmm.
In
a lot of ways.
It's amazing, thinking about like local controversies. getting recorded with a prostitute smoking crack and then getting reelected. It's quite the political feat, right? So very colorful character. But the history is that he would publicly fight with the board, but not really do anything about it. So they would acquiesce. And I remember that Andrew Biggs, who's still a board member, and I think will remain a board member if
hopefully
based on Slaughter and Cook, those decisions. He once told me, Christian, you need to realize nobody ever thought you would actually fight with the board. Like, nobody imagined that was possible. And not only you, but wholesale other members of the board is like, why don't you just whine about it, but let us do it? Like, there was this whole the Barry plan, I would call it, right? I always found it incredibly insulting. Like, why did you think that was going to be the tenor of the relationship?
For two reasons, and I'll start by saying I was in that camp. I really thought that's the way the relationship was meant to work and the way that it would work. One reason we thought that's the way that it would work is that that's the way it worked in the past. You know, that's the way it worked with Marion Barry in Washington, D.C. was the biggest example of that. To some extent, it worked that way in New York in the 1970s. To some extent, it worked that way in Detroit in 2013, although in Detroit, the emergency manager had complete control. So
one man, like
and the mayor and the city council were not in a position. They couldn't have resisted him even if they wanted to. So that was the history. The second reason was that I thought that would work. I mean, the things that we were doing were things we thought had to be done, whether anybody liked it or not. And we knew that they were politically unpopular. And so we knew that y'all couldn't be associated with some of those things, such as a small pension, a pension cut. But we thought that if you signaled your opposition and your hostility to it and left it at that everything would work out. We'd move forward with what we thought needed to be done. You would have the political cover that you needed, and everybody would live happily ever after. But you didn't agree with that, and you didn't get the message, or you rejected the message when it came in, and you really did fight.
But I thought so basically the plan was that we would be hypocrites.
You know, it's not necessarily a hypocrite if you really don't, you really don't agree with it, but you believe that the board was put in place to do things we're not going to agree with. I don't think it's necessarily hypocrite. I mean, it might be hypocritical if you could just wave a wand and make it go away, but you couldn't do that. I mean, you really did have to fight.
And be creative about it.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing you won on the pen. You know, I'm glad you won in the end. I mean, it took a lot of years. It took 2 more years.
And the language in the Tomas, I kind of wrote it, so it was.
Is that right?
Yeah,
that's interesting. So you were causing. I
am always causing trouble
from off the stage.
But I have I was only around 2.5 years. You were 8 years, right?
Almost 8 years, yeah.
Okay. I would argue that the yeoman's work on most of this stuff, even if it closed in between 21 and 22, a lot of the most the long-lasting work was done in those 2.5 years. So examples would be GDB, which was, I know it only gets 2 paragraphs.
It was your life.
But it was my, yeah.
I have a picture of you with the other GDB presidents.
Yeah. The COFINA.
Right.
I think the general architecture of what ends up then becoming the plan of adjustment for the GOs, not the clawbacks, but the GOs definitely. We did PRITCO. We had an agreement with PREPA, the privatization law for PREPA. A lot of the whatever structural reforms were actually signed into law it was during that period. And it was when there was more conflict. And I think with Pedro Pierluisi, with Wanda definitely, and maybe with Jennifer to some extent, you've had the Berry plan operating. But I think that, I know for a fact that if I ask other board members that coincided at the time, they would say that the period where there was more conflict was also the most productive. Or maybe it was because there was more in the air. Like, how do you see that?
I would say that period was a very productive period. And it seems to me it's for a variety of reasons. One reason is it was the beginning. It was when
everything was up in the air. Yeah.
Exactly. And all possibilities were on the table. Nothing had really been foreclosed. So that was one reason. Another reason is that Governor Rosselló was really committed to reform. And so a lot of the things that we wanted to do, y'all also wanted to do. We had some points of real conflict, but there were things that we did together. And then the final thing I would say is there was lots of conflict, but that conflict was interspersed with periods where we really worked together. And one of the times I talk about is the pizza meeting in New York, which there's a picture. It's one of the few pictures in the book is from the pizza meeting where, we thought y'all were gonna be opposing everything we wanted to do. And with PREPA in particular, I remember starting to talk, being really nervous about what the reaction was going to be. And pretty soon, Governor Rosselló is nodding and saying, if you had read my campaign plan, you would realize that I was talking about more or less the same thing even before PROMESA. So there was lots of conflict, but there also were periods of time when we were really closely working together.
In the book, it comes off as you didn't like him. To be honest,
you
make references to getting bankrolled by bondholders and stuff like that. I mean, it looks like you didn't like him.
I actually do like him a lot, and I see how you can read it as not liking him, because I do quote a number of people who say very, very critical things, and I think the critical things are part of the story. But there's another side of the story too. He really did want to reform. He's really smart. We got a lot done together. So I hope that he will see past that and he'll see the good sides, because I do like him. Some level I consider him a friend.
You were quoted in El Nuevo Día a couple of weeks ago saying that, I think it was something to the effect that you were being asked about the 2019 RSA and the PREPA restructuring, which I didn't know you were the one that blew it up.
That's one of the news bits.
When I saw
that's going to be new to a lot of people.
I got really mad.
You can't believe that in 2022 that RSA had
I
any
think
chance.
It should have been closed in 2020.
But it wasn't, and the legislature wouldn't close it. In 2022,
we can go into the details of the legislative
part. There was no way
part.
that RSA was going to survive. And everybody knew that. I mean, in their heart of hearts, the creditors knew that too.
Do you think it was a mistake to blow it up?
Absolutely not. Absolutely. And I talk about this in the book.
Because in the article with El Nuevo Día, sorry, I didn't mention, you said something like, you recognize there are opportunity costs to not exiting the bankruptcy yet.
Absolutely. I mean,
so I was like, wait, is he? When I read this part in the book, I was like, wait, what happened here?
Well, both of those things are true. That being in bankruptcy does impose costs. It imposes the costs of the professionals in the bankruptcy. It also imposes the cost of, there's a low risk premium that is put on contracts because of the uncertainty of bankruptcy. But in 2022, the old 2019 RSA, the tentative agreement that had been reached with a significant majority of the bondholders, there was no way it was affordable. PREPA had deteriorated through this period of time. Even if PREPA could have afforded it in 2019, which I think is debatable in retrospect, no chance in 2022. And so really the only thing that mattered with respect to the RSA, it was going to get changed in 2022, was where you negotiate from. So when we reopened the negotiations, if that RSA was still in place, we would have to be negotiating down from an unaffordable RSA. And our view was we need to clear that out so we can start over and do negotiations that are based on the reality of what today PREPA can afford to pay. And that RSA was not it.
I think they're that hanging chad of the PREPA bankruptcy is
a chad is sort of understated, the hanging.
Well, I'm saying the
bomb.
hanging. I'm making reference to the hanging chad in the 2000 Florida election recount and how that completely overturned democracy, apparently. But it's the pending item, right? You can't close the book on Promesa.
Absolutely not.
Until that thing gets, and PREPA's the thing that started it all, kind of. But going back to the other restructurings, in the book you make reference to the whole audit the debt thing.
Uh-huh.
You don't have to go too much into it, but do you think the restructurings from the point of view of just the financial debt was the juice worth the squeeze? I was looking at, so for example, if you assume that the contingent value instruments that were part of the plan of adjustment for the central government continue to behave as to their repayment as they're behaving right now, in 20 years, financial creditors are going to end up getting like 90% back.
90% of the face value,
yeah,
which is a lot less when you take the time value of money into account.
Yeah,
they're going to get a good recovery.
So that's the thing. Like, was it worth the squeeze? And I'm concerned that with PREPA, eventually when we get something, if we get something, you're going to look back and you say, really, maybe fighting this much for 10 points or something like that? That's.
I don't think it's a fight for 10 points.
You think it's for more?
I think it's for
But
more.
overall, do you think the juice was worth the squeeze in the other restructuring?
I absolutely think it was, because what that restructuring ended up doing is radically reducing the amount of debt that Puerto Rico has from roughly $35 billion. It was reduced to $7.4 billion. A little over $1 billion a year. So it's a tiny percentage, like 6 or 7% of Puerto Rico's own source revenues, never going to be a problem. Those payouts on the contingent value are, they're conditional, as you know, on sales tax revenues being higher than they were projected to be. And if sales tax revenues are higher, there's more of an ability to pay. I really think it was win-win. It's also worth noting, a couple of things may be worth noting, one of which is the economy is a little softer right now, so it's not clear whether those contingent value instruments are going to continue paying out at their full values. There is some uncertainty there. The other thing that's worth mentioning with respect to the comparison to PREPA is the trajectories of the Commonwealth in the PREPA were the opposite. During the course of the PREPA Title III, things were improving, largely because of federal disaster money coming in, but the Commonwealth's ability to pay was going up because of the cash that was coming in. With PREPA's ability to pay is going down and has continued to go down. And that's something that the bondholders just refuse to acknowledge. They seem to have taken the position, we're gonna roll the dice. We're gonna roll the dice that we can somehow force the Commonwealth to bail PREPA out, or we can get 5 Justin Petersons on the board who will pay us 90 cents on the dollar. But they won't even listen to a reasonable offer.
I think the part that gets underplayed on the non-PREPA restructurings is the reduction in non-financial debt.
Right. I think that's true.
I mean, the change regarding the pension freeze on the teachers alone, it's like $8 billion, right?
Yeah.
At least it was $8 billion when I was still.
Yeah,
around.
It was little. I think it was well, maybe it was 8 billion. What was still to be done by the time we got to the Commonwealth restructuring, which was the rest of the freeze on COLAs and cost of living increases and the shift to defined contribution, we estimated that at 5.6 billion.
And then the unsecured debt, that was also greatly
Significantly reduced.
And I think that's the big. I've spoken with people that were involved in the government's fiscal governance in the past. Even in 2012, people were starting to talk about restructuring the financial debt.
Yeah.
The issue was, how do you restructure the non-financial? I think that was the big kicker that nobody wants to talk about, because it's a lot more entertaining to talk about creepy bondholders.
Yeah, Wall Street bondholders. I think there is something to it. I mean, I think it was all needed, but that was a big chunk of the debt, or it was a significant chunk of the debt.
Do you think the audit the debt language or chant, do you think it's serious? It's sincere? Because what I find tragic about it is, I think there's people that really do believe that if you audit it, you're going to find that it's all illegal.
Right.
And you could have just wiped it out, and we would have kept all the money, and nothing bad would have happened afterwards. I do think there's people that are cynical about it, that it was a ploy.
That's probably true. I mean, I certainly think that there are people who genuinely believe that if you do an audit, that what you would find is lots of money went to Swiss bank accounts of political figures, and we can wipe out all the debt and not have any debt anymore. Probably there's some cynicism as well. That tends to be the case with any political position. But it's a difficult public argument. I think it's just wrong. I mean, we very thoroughly investigated the debt. We spent a year. We hired the law firm Cobray and Kim, as you're well aware, who spent a year investigating the debt to see what we could challenge and what the Commonwealth probably didn't legitimately owe. So it did a lot of what an audit would do. And we even did a little bit of what I think a lot of the audit the debt people want, which is to trace where every dollar went. Would be an extraordinary expensive process. We did it with PREPA to trace where the dollars went, and we didn't find it was going to Swiss bank accounts, but we did find that money that was supposed to be going to infrastructure and to capital improvement, a fair amount of that was not going to those places. It was going to operations. It was probably going to PREPA employee salaries. But we didn't see any evidence that it was going to Swiss bank accounts. And I think doing that full audit wouldn't get you anything. We radically restructured the debt. We challenged a fair amount of the debt. Wouldn't get you anything, and it would cost a lot. You'd have to spend a lot of money to trace where every dollar went. So I really don't think that that's a productive campaign, but I do think that some people sincerely believe that it would just wipe all the debt out. I mean, there's not that much debt left, but some people think even that debt could be wiped out.
It's funny how you guys get portrayed as like a collection agency for the bondholders. Anybody
funny is not the word that I would use.
Oh, it's hilarious. If you read the book, you're going to see why it's completely wrong, at least in your case. There's an alternate history where a different board gets appointed, and that would be actually, that would be correct.
I think that's right.
Like,
and
Puerto Rico got, nobody expected the turnout that happened with the appointments.
That's probably true. I would guess in ways positive for some people, negative for other people. So, one of the things that was true about the first board in particular is we were from all over the political spectrum, but we were absolutely on the same page. Everybody was there giving their time without pay because there was a crisis, and we thought each of us had some form of expertise that might help to make 3 million American citizens' lives a little bit better. And I think that surprised people, at least some people on island, that I think eventually, some people at least came to conclude that we do care, that we're not just these heartless intruders from up north. A lot of people didn't reach that conclusion, but a few did. And I'm told the board's polling is going up these days, which is nice. For it couldn't have gone down because it was in the basement. But from the creditor's perspective, I think because 4 of the 7 board members were going to be nominated by Republicans, they were hopeful that they would get a board that would want to pay the creditors off and move on. And I'm one of the people, I think, that maybe the one person that
you're definitely number one on the list.
Well, you've told me that. You told me in 2018, maybe, you told me when you were at my class, teaching my class, you said, David, the bondholders hate you. That's what you said. And they do. I wrote...
but you seem to be proud about it. You wrote a book.
Yeah, and I am who I am. And if you read all of what I'd written about governmental bankruptcies, I've behaved the way you would predict that I would behave. But there was there were at one point in summer of 2018, I think it was summer of 2018, wanted posters with my picture on them were displayed all over the Penn campus, and it was people saying that I'm a board member and all I want to do is to pay Wall Street creditors. And so I wrote an op-ed about this in the Wall Street Journal, and I said, I wish I could introduce those protesters to some actual Wall Street bondholders, because the actual Wall Street bondholders don't like us either. They don't think we're just their collection agent. And Mark Brodsky, the founder of the hedge fund Aurelius, which is a big player in the Commonwealth restructuring, very smart guy, he wrote a letter back to the Wall Street Journal. And he said, in his letter, pretty much, I'm paraphrasing, everything Skeel says in that op-ed about the board and what it's doing is untrue, except the part about us hating him. That's my paraphrase. That's my AI paraphrase of what the letter says. So the bondholders tried to get me kicked off the board in 2020. You
talk about it in the book.
Yeah, I talk about it in the book. They did not like me, but I think even the bondholders in the end were happy with the Commonwealth restructuring. I really think it was a win-win restructuring.
Well, part of the dynamic that you explain a little in the book of these restructurings is the positions and the perspectives of the creditors change as the process moves, right? They buy new bonds at a different price. New players come in, which is part of the why I think focusing only on the financial debt is a mistake, because these people are really good at making money.
They are.
You're not going to beat them. They're just really, they are psychologically different in the sense that they're really, really good at it. And I think someone would say you're different as a law professor. You're really good at it. And nobody can imagine being doing the same thing. These people are really good at making money.
And they are tireless. I mean, and that's part of why they're so good about making money is they never give up. They always come up with another angle for how they can or should get paid more. It really is incredible.
I think that the last question I have is, and this is something I do admit I don't like this a lot in the book.
Well, you're supposed to say everything in the book you love, except the parts that make you throw the book.
I don't like. Sorry, let me rephrase. At least I had the impression that if you read the book and don't know the history that you and I have and that we know, and don't listen to the podcast, it kind of the impression is all the local leaders are wrong, or they're psychotic, or they're too cynical, or they're short term. The drive the car off the cliff quote that I gave you that I still do believe in a game of chicken, a Puerto Rico politician will always drive the car off the cliff. but it gives the impression that we are kind of helpless. And it gets to a point where I was saying, in my head, the conversation that I was having inside my head is like, David, do we even deserve to getting help? Because if apparently we keep electing the wrong people, we complain about the wrong things, we focus on the wrong subjects, right? Because that's what's at least the discussion a lot in the book. Even the people that are appointed to the board that are Puerto Rican always have some kind of an edge. Like, do we deserve to even be helped? That's something that I didn't like that much in the book.
What I would say to that is, if someone were to write a similar book about the New York crisis in the 1970s, about the Washington crisis in the 1990s, I think it's going to look the same way. I mean, I wouldn't want that to be the takeaway of the book, that Puerto Rican politicians are somehow different than other politicians. I think the real story, I really think this is a case study for how you end up with dysfunctionality in government and what your options are when you end up in a crisis as a result. I think it would look really similar in any of these other places. I really don't believe Puerto Rican politicians are different. And I've seen that strain on the mainland in particular. Yeah. Sometimes I even see it here. I mean, the two things that I see often are, Puerto Rican politicians are hapless or are inherently always irresponsible, and Puerto Rican politics is just uniquely corrupt is another thing that I often hear, and it's just not true. My view is Puerto Rican politicians are like politicians elsewhere, and they are responding to political pressures. Doing things like having a small pension cut is not something that's going to get you votes in any state in the country or any city in the country. And so I really think this is more about how do these different dynamics work. When you have politicians responding to political imperatives, you have undemocratically elected board members coming in as technocrats who've never been, most of them, in politics, yeah. In the particular politics, make the mistakes we make as technocrats. I see it as a universal human story, not as, it's about Puerto Rico and the enormous costs of the crisis in Puerto Rico, but it's a more universal story in my view.
Yeah, because my impression of you was not only that you got appointed to, you developed a passion for Puerto Rico. You gave a class on Puerto Rican literature. Like, who does that?
Anybody who's read it.
Yeah.
But I
mean, like a bankruptcy
true.
Professor you wouldn't think that's what they do, but you clearly developed a cariño, o sea, you really like us.
I do, and for lots of different, I came in, I was appointed as a bankruptcy professor, as a technocrat. That's what I came in. I didn't come in thinking one way or another of what I would think about Puerto Rico, but all kinds of things shaped me. When I was first appointed to the board, I had more than one student from Puerto Rico come up to me and say, I want to go back to the island, but there's not opportunity there. I hope y'all can help do something. And then I started coming here, and it's an amazing place. It's beautiful. The people are amazing. The amount of different dimensions of life you have on an island that is 35 miles by 100 miles is astonishing. The literature is incredible. What's not to love?
I do think that expectation on you was on the board itself as an institution is unfair. I think Promesa is a law that is focused on making Puerto Rico's past bearable. The future's up to us.
It's a great point.
And I think people don't appreciate it. Like, every time they say the board hasn't done enough for economic development, I'm like, what do you think they're going to do? Like, I think it's about the board, and Promesa overall is about making the past bearable. It's not about guaranteeing the future. And if you don't see it that way, I think you're missing the point of it.
I completely, I love that expression, making the past bearable. You know, I'd put just a slight bit of future in there and say, which is related to make the past bearable. Make the past bearable and help create the conditions for the future is my view of what the board's role. Our role was never to pick industries, you know, what is the future of the Puerto Rico economy to look like, but to, as you said, make the past bearable, try to help lay some foundations for fiscal responsibility for the long term, and then just see the flower bloom.
Where can people get the book? When does it come out?
That's actually a better question than it ordinarily would be. It officially comes out August 25.
Okay.
So if you order it from Amazon now, you'll get it August 25. If you order it directly from the publisher, Paul Dry, and you Google Skeel, Promised Land, you'll get the publisher, you get it now. You know, so they're sending it out now. So for the next 3 weeks, if you want to read it soon, you know, order it from the publisher. After that, Amazon or anywhere else.
I'll put a link to the publisher in the show notes.
That'd be great.
So you can get it. Everybody should buy the book and read it. There's gossip that we didn't discuss, but it's pretty juicy. I bet Justin and Anthony are going to be pissed. And I'm in the book a lot. And some stuff I agree with, and another I have notes. But generally, I'm happy with how I was treated. So, David.
Glad to hear that.
Thanks for coming on the show.
It's been a real pleasure. It's always a delight to see you, Christian.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bueno, señores, este ha sido otro episodio de La Trinchera. Como siempre, le damos gracias por sintonizar y les pedimos que por favor compartan el episodio y el programa con sus amistades, sus familiares, compañeros de trabajo y hasta con la gente que les caiga mal. Por favor, suscribirse a La Trinchera en su plataforma preferida y dejen un rating positivo 5 estrellas en la plataforma que merezca. En el caso de Apple Podcast, por favor, escribir un review bonito. Si van a decir algo negativo, se lo pueden reservar. A nadie le interesa lo amargada que es su vida. Y si desean comentar el episodio, pueden hacerlo en Spotify, en la área de Q&A, debajo de los show notes, o en la parte de comentarios en el caso de YouTube. Les aseguro que leo todos los comentarios y mensajes y los tomo en consideración. Y como siempre, le damos gracias a Eric Harper por nuestra música Spirit of España y a Claudia Rosario por nuestro arte. Nos vemos en la próxima.